who is here with us again this morning.
Twice as nice, Savannah. It's so nice to see you this morning.
Thanks for being with us again.
Let's do it again,
shall we? We shall. That's a
I'm
good
Sam
show.
Buck, in for Joe Fryer.
And I'm Savannah Sellers. Thanks so much for being here. We're going to get started this morning in the Middle East, where the conflict between Israel and Iran appears to be ramping up as it reaches its 1-week mark. In Israel, paramedics say there are at least 25 casualties this morning after Iranian missiles struck an area near Tel Aviv. And in the south, at least 3 people were injured after a strike hit a hospital. Iranian officials say the target was a military site nearby.
So overnight, the Israeli military says it continued to strike locations key to Iran's goal of developing nuclear weapons, including the site of an inactive nuclear reactor near the city of Arak, south of Tehran. Meanwhile, President Trump is weighing his options, including the U.S. potentially entering the conflict.
I have ideas as to what to do, but I haven't made a final. I like to make the final decision 1 second before it's due, because things change. I mean, especially with war. Things change with war. It can go from one extreme to the other.
On a knife's edge right now, Matt Bradley is joining us this morning along with Monica Alba. We're going to be getting analysis as well. Matt, I want to start with you on the ground, though. Let's begin by talking about these exchanges overnight. For a long period of time, it seemed like Iran was talking a lot about its effectiveness or trying to strike in the heart of Tel Aviv, but hadn't had much success. What are you seeing on the ground this morning?
That's right. Well, we've had a reprieve for the last couple of days. There were no deaths for more than 48 hours, well more than that. And actually, just this morning was the first time we've really seen any serious injuries in just the past couple of days. It had looked as though the Iranian offensive, the Iranian reprisal attacks against Israel was kind of tapering off. Now it looks as though that's no longer the case. And in fact, just last evening, the Israeli officials had been saying that they were going to be loosening some of the restrictions on public gatherings and things like that, normal day-to-day life stuff. We don't know whether that's still going to stand. But we just heard this morning from an Israeli military official. He said that the Israelis have so far taken out about 200 Iranian missile launchers. He said that that is about 2/3 of the number of launchers that remain. But as he said, they can still hit us, and we're still seeing that today with more ballistic missiles coming in, and we can probably expect more and more. He also mentioned that strike at that nuclear water plant. And now this is something that had been decommissioned, but he said that they had heard, the Israelis had heard, that there were plans to use it to enrich plutonium. Now, up until now, it's been mostly uranium in the Iranian nuclear enrichment program. He was saying that plutonium is an essential ingredient, and the Israelis understood that this facility that was hit overnight was going to be used for plutonium. Guys.
So, Matt, Israel says these attacks are this effort to stop Iran from producing nuclear weapons, as Sam mentioned. Overnight, the Israeli military said they had some success in that regard, that the IAF struck a nuclear weapons development site, also an inactive nuclear reactor. But tell us, in the context of Iran's nuclear program, what this is doing. How damaging are these attacks, and what does this mean broadly for their program?
Well, it's a great question, because the attacks against the nuclear program have been the centerpiece of this entire campaign since it started last Friday, nearly a week ago. But the fact is that there's been a lot of analysis and speculation that it's unclear, despite this huge bombardment, just how much damage Israel has done to Iran's nuclear program. We know that the facility at Natanz, which is Iran's main facility, took the brunt of the beating, and we understand from the IAEA, the UN's nuclear watchdog, that it's quite possible, quite likely, really, that the centrifuges and enrichment mechanisms underground at that facility were badly damaged in the attack, even though it doesn't sound as though Israeli attacks actually penetrated the earth and hit the underground part of the facility. So if that's the case, that could set back that nuclear effort. But there still is that final question about the Fordo facility, a smaller facility that's buried deeper into a mountain. That is the one that the Israelis want the United States to participate in destroying, using some of these GBU-57 bombs, the mother of all bombs, the huge ordnance that dig into the ground and can actually hit into a facility like that and destroy its nuclear weapons. It might take more than one of those huge weapons to do it, but this is the big question right now, and the one that Donald Trump is mulling over.
Right, because, Matt, there's no guarantee, even if these bunker busters were deployed, that it actually would decimate Fordo, right? That seems to be an open question. But while we have you also, can you shed a little bit of light as to what's going on? The latest from Gaza, apparently it's been one of the deadliest weeks for Palestinians just trying to get food aid there. So according to local health officials, more than 140 people have died just in the last 24 hours. Why does this simple distribution of food continue to result in such loss of life?
Yeah, and this has been hugely controversial, even as we're seeing this Iran conflict going on. You know, the new system is backed by a U.S.-backed group called the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, and this group has been controversial for its methods and for its affiliations. It's been suspected of having ties to the Israelis, to the extent that the Israelis might even control it entirely. Again, it's unclear. The Israeli government has denied that they're funding this organization, but aid groups have said that they refuse to work with it, and they say that its independence has been compromised and that it should not be the one distributing food if it's doing so on behalf of the United Nations, on behalf of the Israeli government. They're saying international institutions and advocacy groups like the United Nations, they should be the ones who are distributing food as a sort of neutral arbiter. Now, whether or not this is going to continue, it looks as though it's set to continue. There's no other way to get food into Gaza at the moment, but this is by all means a very, very dangerous setup. There are only 4 aid distribution points right now operating in the Gaza Strip by this Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, and regularly we see acts of violence. Now, the Israelis have said that it's Hamas who are firing at the people who are waiting in line for food. Now, we've heard from Palestinians, ordinary people who've been waiting in line for food, and they say that it is the Israelis time and time again. So, again, Gaza's very difficult to discern exactly what's going on.
Tragic from every angle, certainly. Matt, thank you very much.
We're now joined by NBC News White House correspondent Monica Alba. Monica, good morning. Of course, the big question waking up this morning is, will the United States enter this conflict in this more official way, actually taking aim, as Sam was just discussing with Matt, at this particular nuclear facility with this particular type of bomb? I mean, at the top of the show, we saw, he told reporters yesterday he may do it, he may not do it. We saw this convening of his team yesterday in the Situation Room. What is the latest right now on where the president stands when it comes to making a decision on that front?
Well, Savannah, I expect he will continue to huddle with some of his top national security advisors today, and they'll continue to be monitoring this in real time before there is a final decision. And sometimes the president does like to be very cryptic in his language. He was obviously doing that a little bit yesterday, but he also really wanted to engage with reporters and talk a little bit about his thinking. And it seemed as of yesterday that many options still remained on the table. But here's a little bit more window into how he's approaching this big decision. Listen.
I don't want to get involved either, but I've been saying for 20 years, maybe longer, that Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. I've been saying it for a long time. And I think they were a few weeks away from having one. And they had to sign a document. I think they wish they signed it now. And they want to meet, but it's a little late to meet, but they want to meet. And they want to come to the White House. They'll even come to the White House, so we'll see.
And the president made that claim about Iranians wanting to come to Washington several times. Iranian officials, for their part, have strongly denied that, saying they wouldn't, quote, come to grovel at the gates of the White House.
So, Monica, it feels almost like it's a bit of a moving target here. No enrichment at all now seems to be the White House's posture. Iran's supreme leader rejecting President Trump's call for an unconditional surrender, whatever that entails, warning that U.S. military intervention would be met with, quote, irreparable damage. So at the same time, there's this overriding question about intelligence, right? What the White House has actually seen in terms of how close Iran is to enriching enough uranium to have a bomb at its disposal. What more can you tell us about the intel?
Yeah, because this is a really complex concept in that there is different thinking about how close Iran might be to having a nuclear weapon, depending on how you interpret what it means to have enough uranium. But then you have to think about the idea of having enough of that, but then actually building the weapon and then having to test the weapon as a way to talk about whether they would be ready to use the weapon. And as far as the president says, he believes they were a few weeks away. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said it was more like potentially months, but that it could be by the end of the year. And so that has really been a moving target and a moving question as well. But the U.S. intel community has been pretty fixed on saying they did not believe that Iran was close to actually having this weapon, but that they were very, very close to having the material needed to accomplish that. So that is what has led to really this rift between the president and his own director of national intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, guys.
Monica, also, I want to get more information on that and just sort of the relationship between the two right now. What role is she playing right now in this conflict? It sort of feels like she has fallen out of favor with the president. People who are around the situation seem to be indicating that as he weighs these options on Iran. This is the person, though, right, who's across every intelligence agency, seemingly should be at the center of any decision, any discussion like this. What's the latest that we know here?
Yeah, it's significant because it was her comments in March during testimony to lawmakers where she said she didn't believe Iran was as close to being able to have a nuclear weapon. And then when the president was asked about that just a couple of nights ago on Air Force One, he really went out there and said, I don't care what she said. I still maintain my position. Now, NBC News has a really long piece of reporting on NBCnews.com that everybody should check out that really delves into this and talks to some of her allies who say they know that this was something that has certainly angered some people in the West Wing, this divide. But clearly, for now, she has been able to keep her job, though she has been kept out of the loop on some key meetings on this, including the one at Camp David, where they first laid out some of these decisions about what to do. And that was notable and raised a lot of eyebrows as well. Her people say it was because she was on National Guard duty that weekend. Sam and Savannah.
Monica Alba covering a lot for us. Thank you very much.
All right, we're going to jump into some more analysis here on the conflict. Let's bring in Will Todman. He is a senior fellow in the Middle East program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Will, good morning. You know, this obviously evolves really by the hour. It's been a week now since we first heard from sources about Israel's plans to attack Iran and President Trump's initial opposition to them, and this whole pendulum has changed, right? What moved the needle here? Trump's frustration with lack of a deal, a nuclear deal with Iran, Prime Minister Netanyahu's insistence on attacking Iran with or without U.S. support. There's a lot of theories floated out there. What do we know?
Yeah, thank you, Sam. I think it's both of those things. I think President Trump really wanted to give diplomacy a chance and instructed his administration to engage in direct talks with the Iranians. We saw 5 rounds of talks. There was a 6th that had been scheduled to take place this past Sunday. But I think he grew increasingly frustrated that the Iranians were not willing to make the concessions that he wanted. He saw Iran in a historically weak position, given the string of losses that its partners and proxies have faced across the region over the past year, thanks to Israeli operations. And I think he was expecting them to fold more quickly. They were very insistent on continuing to have the ability to enrich uranium. The Iranians say that that's their national right. And so I think he grew frustrated that they weren't willing to compromise on that. But then, of course, we have also seen an intense lobbying campaign from Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu, who has never trusted Iran in these negotiations and tried to convince President Trump that a military operation against Iran's nuclear facilities could destroy its ability to build that bomb that we've been talking about. And I think over the first 24 hours or so of this war last Friday, I think President Trump was really impressed with the success that the Israelis were able to achieve. They killed a huge number of the most senior Iranian military officials. They killed a lot of senior nuclear scientists. And I think that impressed President Trump, and he began to explore these other options.
Will, I'm also wondering if you could sort of just put in context exactly what it would mean for the U.S. to get involved, like how serious that step would be, but then also what the potential fallout is here, as we've heard from Iran's supreme leader, that any U.S. intervention would be met with irreparable damage. What could that look like?
So first, I think it's important to note that the US is already involved to some degree. Of course, it's been involved in helping to defend Israel against the salvos of missiles that Iran has fired at Israel. But also it's understood that the US has been sharing intelligence that has aided Israel in its operations. But I think the big milestone is whether or not the US actually conducts that bombing campaign on the Fordo nuclear facilities. And as Matt previously said, it's really believed that it's only the U.S. Bomb, this 30,000 pound bomb, that would be able to stand a chance of destroying that. But this is a really risky operation to attempt. This bomb has not been used in a conflict situation before, and it's not exactly clear just how many nuclear facilities Iran has, if there could be an additional one. And so I think it's very difficult to be sure that this would actually destroy Iran's nuclear facility completely. And of course, Iran has a host of options to retaliate. I think for the US, the bases that it has in the region and the troops that are deployed there would almost certainly come under attack from Iran in retaliation. And that is a real concern. But also Iran could take other steps that could disrupt global energy trade through the Straits of Hormuz.
entanglement would obviously be layered, and obviously you're looking at a situation where we don't know how this is going to play out. But what is the U.S. objective in all of it remains front and center. Will Todman, thank you so much for joining us with that analysis this morning.
Great context. We appreciate it. Well, in economic news, the Federal Reserve held interest rates steady. That was expected. This was yesterday. The central bank signaled that 2 rate cuts by the end of the year were still on the table.
As you said, expectations from yesterday, Fed keeps those rates on hold amid expectations also of higher inflation and lower economic growth. So that's the problem down the road here. Fed Chair Jerome Powell saying that he sees inflation really picking up over the summer, Savannah, as President Trump's tariffs work their way down to the consumer.
Ultimately, the cost of the tariff has to be paid, and some of it will fall on the end consumer. We know that because that's what businesses say. That's what the data say from past. So we know that's coming, and we just want to see a little bit of that before we make judgments prematurely.
Joining us now with more on this is Yahoo Finance senior reporter Ali Canal. Ali, thanks very much for joining us in the studio this morning. Good to see you. So just help us understand this latest decision. We both said it was expected, but just tell us a little bit more.
Expected. So Fed is on hold for now, and they've been on hold since January, meaning that they are not raising or lowering interest rates. The last time we saw the Fed take action was in December. They cut interest rates in 2024. They slashed interest rates by a total of 100 basis points or 1%. But at this point, the fact that they are remaining on hold, like you just heard from Jerome Powell, they are prioritizing inflation at a time when there's just a lot of unknowns, a lot of uncertainty. We have the back and forth trade developments with the U.S. We do not know how tariffs will impact the consumer over the long term. He did say that over the summer, we should continue to see that impact show up in the data. And the sources that I've been speaking with have said probably around July is when we're actually going to see some of that impact. And you guys were just talking about the Israel-Iran conflict. That could have a ripple effect on inflation. We saw a spike in oil prices that has trickled through into gas prices. So there's just a lot of uncertainties right now. So the Fed just wants to stay on hold, assess the situation, and then make a decision.
Right, because there are so many possible sources of driving up inflationary realities, right? Whether that's the tariffs, whether it's an oil market that suddenly becomes much more expensive. Is it realistic, Ali, to think that rates might be cut later in the year? Or what are you expecting? What are we expecting to see?
Well, the majority of Fed officials still see 2 rate cuts by the end of this year. But what was interesting is that there was more dispersion when it comes to the number of folks that think we are going to stay on hold. So 7 Fed officials think that we will have no cuts this year, that we will continue to remain on hold. Interest rates will be elevated over the foreseeable future. 8 officials think we will see 2 cuts, and then 2 officials only think we're going to have 1 cut. So it seems like there's this gap between what the Fed thinks is going to be the priority moving forward. And Jerome Powell was asked about this, why we saw such divergence among some of those officials. And he said that each member is evaluating a different type of risks. There's the inflation part of the equation. There's GDP growth. If that slows, if that has a trickle-through effect into the labor market and we see a spike in the unemployment rate, then the Fed would also want to lower rates. So it just depends on how the economic data shakes out.
What does this mean for us at home, our wallets, as we think about the rest of the year? We know that's where interest rates are at. You're thinking about buying a house, selling a house. What should we keep in mind?
Well, unfortunately, that means borrowing costs are going to stay high for now. So you just said mortgage rates. That has an impact on the Federal Reserve rate decision. We also have the loan you pay on your car, credit card bills. So all of that is going to remain elevated. However, if you are a saver, if you're invested in a money market account or a high yield savings account, you can benefit from some of these higher rates. We aren't as high as we were back in 2023, 2024, when the Fed was aggressively raising interest rates. They have cut since that time. However, we are still above 4% for some banks out there, for some credit card companies, so you can still take advantage.
Indeed. So a time to save, certainly, but if you're trying to buy a house right now, there's just so little movement on the market because no one knows what's going to happen with the rates.
And you're going to hold on to that low mortgage rate if you've got one.
Exactly, because shortly after the pandemic, we had interest rates near zero. So no one wants to sell their home and take on a higher mortgage.
Don't remind us.
Yes, I'm sorry.
Ali, thank you so much for that insight.
Of course.
Thanks.
Well, in a stunning verdict yesterday, a Massachusetts jury found that Karen Reed was not guilty in her retrial on murder charges in a case that absolutely transfixed the country. She stood accused of killing her police officer boyfriend, John O'Keefe, with her car on a cold winter night. Now, emotions ran high yesterday as the judge announced the verdict. You see the crowds there erupting in cheers, supporting her from outside the courtroom, ending a nearly 4-year-long legal battle. NBC News correspondent Emily Ikeda was outside the courthouse as this happened.
Karen Reed walking out of court with hand over heart and a major win in her murder trial redo.
I just want to say two things. Number one is I could not be standing here without these amazing supporters who have supported me and my team financially and, more importantly, emotionally for almost 4 years. And the second thing I want to say is no one has fought harder for justice for John O'Keefe than I have.
She was accused of hitting her police officer boyfriend John O'Keefe with her car in a drunken argument and leaving him to die in the cold back in 2022. But her defense has insisted there was no collision and Reed was framed. And after 3.5 days of deliberating, the jury of 7 women and 5 men agreed to acquit her of the most serious charge.
Murder in the second degree. What say you? Is the defendant at the bar guilty or not guilty? Not guilty.
Also clearing her of manslaughter and fleeing the scene of a deadly accident, prompting hugs and tears inside the courtroom. Cheers even heard from crowds gathered outside.
So say you, Mr. Foreman. So say you all.
The jury did convict Reed of a lesser charge, operating a vehicle under the influence of alcohol, after considering nearly 8 weeks of testimony and mountains of material, including crash demos, vehicle and phone data, and Reed's own words.
I mean, I didn't think I hit him, but could I have clipped him?
Reed acknowledging she shouldn't have been driving the night O'Keefe died.
I felt like I was buzzed.
Her defense tried to point the finger at law enforcement, but in a new interview with Dateline, the lead investigator fired for his misconduct on the case, now speaking out.
What do you want to say to anyone who believes the narrative, the defense's narrative, that you are corrupt, that you framed Karen Reed?
I laugh because it's such a ridiculous accusation. There's not one piece of evidence or fact to support that, because it did not happen. I would never do something like that.
Did you frame Karen Reed?
Absolutely not.
This is the second time a jury has deliberated Reed's fate since her first trial last year ended in a mistrial.
I'm declaring a mistrial in this case.
The case since garnering intense public interest both online and in person, with a sea of supporters in pink erupting in cheers at word of the jury's verdict.
It feels wonderful because we got a non-guilty verdict. It feels great. It's worth everything.
Every minute of travel, every penny we paid to get here was worth it for the verdict.
But a much more somber tone from O'Keefe's loved ones. His mother had testified in the retrial.
I hear Karen Reed yell, "Peg, is he dead? Is he dead, Peg? Peg, is he dead?"
Some of those at the center of the case who testified against Reed, writing in a statement, "Today we mourn with John's family and lament the cruel reality that this prosecution was infected by lies and conspiracy theories," going on to say the result is a devastating miscarriage of justice. Karen Reed was sentenced on the spot to a year of probation for driving under the influence, a far cry from what prosecutors had been hoping for in this case. Karen Reed could have faced up to life in prison if convicted of the top charge, second-degree murder. Back to you.
The end of a years-long legal saga there. Thank you, Emily.
Well, this morning, transgender rights activists in the U.S. are taking stock after a major setback. The Supreme Court upheld a Tennessee law yesterday that bans gender transition medical care for minors. And nearly half the country has similar bans in place. Reporter Lolita Lopez from NBC Los Angeles has the reaction from some of the LGBT community in West Hollywood.
But although it might feel like your country has turned their back on you, that you just gained an enormous amount of aunties and uncles.
Queen Victoria Ortega sends a message to transgender young people after the Supreme Court upheld a Tennessee law restricting gender transition care for young people.
This opens the door to set the precedent of criminalizing not only parents, but kids and physicians.
Her comments come from experience, having transitioned at age 16 with parents who supported the decision. The 6-3 Supreme Court ruling is likely to have an impact on the 24 other states that have already enacted laws similar to the one in Tennessee, which bars gender transition surgery, puberty blockers, and hormone therapy for youth. Chief Justice John Roberts writing for the majority that the case carries scientific and policy debates about the safety, efficacy, and propriety of medical treatments in an evolving field, adding the Equal Protection Clause does not resolve these disagreements. Attorneys supporting gender-affirming care say some young people can still undergo medical procedures as long as they do not identify as transgender.
Why can cisgender young people receive the treatment and transgender young people not? And the difference is their sex. That's sex discrimination.
In her dissent, Justice Sonia Sotomayor writes, by retreating from meaningful judicial review exactly where it matters most, the court abandons transgender children and their families to political whims. Politics may certainly play a role with more Democratic states like California allowing for the care. The ruling does not affect states that do not have bans, though one of the largest providers of care for transgender youth, Children's Hospital of Los Angeles, recently announced the closing of its Trans Youth Center in July. Others say there are services still available.
We have a real commitment to working with our partners here in California and across state lines to ensure that transgender children, youth, and families continue to have access to this life-saving service.
Our thanks to Lolita Lopez for that report.
No doubt. It's been a little turbulent, if you've noticed, on the weather front.
Yeah, no kidding.
The East Coast is at risk again for some severe weather today. We got some details for you for your morning News Now weather.
Yes, Michelle Grossman's here. Michelle, even here in the city, just weather whiplash.
I know, and so soupy and humid today, and that's going to be the target for some severe weather today. So we have the humidity in place, we have the warmth in place, we're going to see those temperatures rise. All we need is that lifting mechanism, and that's going to be the cold front that's moving through later on today and through the evening hours. And we could see some pretty heavy rainfall leading to flash flooding. Certainly could see some airline delays as well. So if you're flying out today, you want to call ahead, especially later on this afternoon and evening. Right now, we're looking at a cluster of storms moving through portions of the Tennessee Valley, some rain throughout the Great Lakes. This is all moving off to the east, and we will see the threat for severe weather. So we looked at it Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and now Thursday, targeting the East Coast. 64 million Americans under the risk for severe storms. That includes winds that could gust to 60 miles per hour. That causes damage on its own. Damaging hail, a tornado or two is possible. Notice these colors here. So where you see the orange, that's an enhanced risk, 3 out of 5 on the severity scale. That would be the likeliest spot for seeing some severe storms, and that's along some major cities, New York City, Philadelphia, D.C., down to Richmond, but also the yellow here. So now we're talking New England all the way down to portions of the Mid-Atlantic, Burlington, Albany, Roanoke, Charlotte. Could see some strong storms, too, as we go throughout later part of the day once we get that daytime heating going. Now, we talked about the airports because we are possibly going to see some delays in Detroit, Charlotte, Atlanta, and really likely to see delays in Boston, New York City, Philadelphia, D.C., especially even with those winds howling at 60 miles per hour with any of those storms moving through. Flash flood risk. Also, we're looking at hourly rainfall rates of 1 to 2 inches per hour. The ground is so saturated. We've had so much rain, so it's not going to take much to cause some flooding, and that's certainly something we're going to watch, too. Big story today. Another big story is the heat out in the Southwest once again, and really heat overspreading most of the country. We're going to really warm it up over the next several days of fire risk throughout portions of the West and Southwest, too. Dangerous heat for 47 million people, and 47 million people are under alerts. We have more than that under some heat today. We're looking at heat warnings, heat watches, heat advisories. Where you see that purple, we're looking at a heat watch. Pink is in the heat warning, and heat advisory is orange. This is why we have that jet stream lifted so high in the north. And guys, we're going to see temperatures into the 90s for several days in the Northeast, and we could have our first heat wave. The Southwest, some spots could see temperatures up to 160, so nearing 120.
116.
Yeah.
Oh, I thought you said 160.
I thought you said 160.
I'm glad you clarified that. I'm glad you clarified that. They always say we don't get it quite right, but that's wrong. 160.
We think you get it right, Michelle.
Thank you.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.